small radar cross-section.
150 miles long. EGR's confirmed.
Tell them we have an artificial oxy down here.
Dad? Are you okay, Dad?
Fine. Houston, we have a problem. Something's happening to me.
The Buzz is back. Directed by Toby Hooper.
Everything's fine now.
She's destroyed worlds.
That girl was no girl. She was totally alien to this planet in her life form. And totally dangerous.
I don't care who says it.
I'm the Lord of the Harvest.
Who's that? Some new health food bunch?
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Sleazoids, the podcast where we go down the rabbit hole of 20th century genre fare, from the most influential canon classics to the trashiest exploitation films we can get our hands on, and invite you to tag along in helping us create a canon of sleaze. Week is a double feature grindhouse style where we discuss two films loosely related by subject, genre, actor, filmmaker, or franchise, and at the end of each episode, along with our honorary Sleazoids, which you can become by subscribing on Patreon.
Join the sleaze.
We decide on all the official ratings and rankings for every film that we cover. Patreon subscribers also get an on-air shout-out and 2 bonus episodes every single month, which we have been doing for over 2 years. Yeah. So I think we were getting near 60 plus, maybe even bonus episodes. So for anyone who hasn't made the jump, there's over 60 of them waiting for you.
Plus with the bonus transmissions as well. So.
Yeah, and including bonus transmissions, there's about 70 plus, because we are talking about new release genre movies. Not that there's too many coming out, but the ones that are coming out online, we're
whatever
talking about them all.
Whatever we can get our hands
on. So again, if that interests you at all, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. And speaking of which, we did have a lot of people make the jump this week, so I'm going to kind of rip through them a little quickly, just because there's so many. But thanks to Dog Guy.
Awesome.
Yep. Aaron, Rational J Centrist, Daniel Butler, Nicholas Tinoco, Nathan Schrosphere, Philip Sick, Nate James. Holy crap, this is still going. Spencer Bowman, Dennis Rowland, Beat Pikey, Aaron Salazar, Brandon Otto, Sean Karstein. Oh, that's it. There we go.
Perfect. Well, thank you, guys.
The list just kept going, so I couldn't figure out where the end was. So thanks so much to all of you guys.
Really appreciate it.
That's a lot of you signing up this week. Hope you guys are enjoying those bonus episodes. But that's the one plug for the week. The other plug, as always, is Apple Podcasts. If you guys are listening on Apple Podcasts, and I see the stats, I know a lot of you are, scroll down to the very bottom and give us a good old rating and review down there. It helps us climb the ranks and find new listeners over there. We appreciate that as well. But yeah, that being said, welcome back. I'm, as always, your host, Josh Lewis, and joining me also, as always, my co-host,
Jamie Miller. Welcome back, guys.
We are back talking more sleazy movies for you guys this week. I think 2 weeks ago would have been the last time you guys would have heard from us, and we did some ultra trash.
Oh, yeah.
We talked Jorg Buderite's Necromantic 2 from 1991, a movie that is a sequel to a movie about necrophilia and climaxes on a dude stabbing himself in the gut romantically until he ejaculates all over himself.
Yeah, and ejaculates blood as well. Very metal. Very metal. And
we paired that with splatter naked blood, which has a 3-way with a sentient cactus wearing VR goggles.
Yeah.
And also features a woman eating herself with a fork and knife, including her nipple and her labia. So
it's a hell of a ride.
We talked basically achieving transcendence through bodily harm last week, and the line between pleasure and pain. So if that interests you at all, we had special guest Sam Beaudrejon on last week who made her case for those films. But last week, for the bonus listeners over on Patreon, we talked sort of class warfare horror and two very tonally wild movies. We talked Brian Yesna's Society from 1989 alongside Wes Craven's The People Under the Stairs from 1991. Both movies Jamie and I were quite fond of, and very different looks at the rich literally feeding on the poor.
Yes, yeah. I especially enjoyed. I mean, Society is it's just awesome. I mean, it's Society. If you've seen it, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But The People Under the Stairs just had a really awesome tone to it, where it was like similar to Dolls, where it was like that kids movie, but in an adult environment kind of thing.
About kids realizing, the horror of gentrification. So all of a sudden the horror kind of seeps into a child's point of view. So yeah, it was very cool to watch People Under the Stairs, and then Society. Anyone, who has any idea about the surreal last 15 minutes of that will definitely be interested in that episode. But yeah, so again, patreon.com/Sleazoids podcast. That was last week's episode. But this week we have a very special returning guest calling in from the We Hate Movies podcast. We have Chris Cabin. Chris, how you doing?
Doing all right. How you guys doing?
Good.
Yeah, we're doing as well as we can. We're calling in from the quarantine zone. We assume you are as well.
Yes, I am. I've been evading the plague state as best I can.
Nice. Well, I think I was trying to find out like exactly when we had you on last. I think it was almost exactly a year ago. I think it was around like May or June last year we had you on, and we were talking Arnold Schwarzenegger. We did Pumping Iron and Last Action Hero with
Those
you.
Were fun.
Which was a lot of fun.
Arnie plays the villain without knowing.
Yeah, I love that.
And we knew that we were going to have you on again, but we were thinking because, there was a new Dune movie coming out this year that you were going to come on and talk about David Lynch's Dune, because I know that among people I sort of follow, you seem to like that film a lot more than others do, and I wanted that case to be made. I've still never seen it, still never read the book.
Yeah, me neither, actually.
But I was very excited to talk about that, and now we don't know if movies are ever coming out again. So
ever.
We will probably have you on a third time if Dune ever decides it's going to come out, but we decided we wanted to to have you on just in case that doesn't happen and they scrap Dune and they go into reshoots for the next 5 years. Who knows?
Turns into an HBO Max series.
Exactly. But Chris, as it goes, we have you the guests bring on the films, and we kind of let you wild out this week. So what 3 films have you brought on with you this week?
Hell yeah.
And why do they pair together?
These are the Hooper canon films, man. I love these movies. This is to me such after all the rigmarole of, is it Spielberg or Hooper who gets the credit for Poltergeist? It's so incredible just to watch him do big movies for once, because he didn't do it after this, and he didn't really do it before this other than Poltergeist. Right. It's kind of a vision of what it's like to really give a director who built all on indie, and like his first run out of the gate was this total mess. I mean, it was a huge hit. Poltergeist was humongous, but like the credit of it and his work in it was always questioned. Where these are his. These are absolutely his. Mm-hmm. And that's what I love about him, is that there's, after this, Spontaneous Combustion's interesting, and I actually have a lot of love for The Mangler. But otherwise, this is to me the last run of where he was really doing what he wanted to do.
Interesting. See, I've been thinking about checking out some of his like mid 2000s output and stuff like that, just to kind of see what he was doing. Like something like the Toolbox Murders seems sort of like interesting, but I have like really no idea. So it was really awesome that you decided to bring these ones on, because we actually just did, like, we hadn't done Hooper like until like 3 months ago. We were like really putting it off, and someone finally brought on Texas Chainsaw, and then we decided to do Eaten Alive in the Funhouse as an episode as well. So anyone who hasn't heard our previous discussions on Hooper, you can find them. They're very recent. And we had a great time with Eaten Alive in the Funhouse. And then when you said, yeah, can I bring in all of the films he made after those 3? We were like, yeah, all right. We are prepared for that.
Yeah.
So, and the 3 titles, if I'm correct, they're Life Force, 1985, Invaders from Mars, 1986, and Texas Chainsaw 2, also from 1986. So he must have shot these really fucking fast.
Invaders from Mars and Texas Chainsaw Massacre were like he was doing pre-production on Texas Chainsaw while he was editing Invaders from Mars.
Mm-hmm. Wow. I actually have a funny story about that because I was watching some of the special features on the Texas Chainsaw Scream Factory Blu-ray, and they had a thing with the editor and his story about he edited Invaders from Mars and basically saved Invaders from Mars, and then Tobe Hooper was like, yeah, you can also edit Texas Chainsaw 2.
Thanks for saving my movie.
Yeah. So either way, there's some interesting connections because Canon, obviously, the production company we've talked about many times, they, offered Hooper the 3-picture deal, and I assume it came at the cost of he had to do a Texas Chainsaw sequel. I don't know that for sure, but that seems like the most like the one that Canon would be the most, they would want the most out of him.
You think that's part of the reason that it kind of turns into like I don't want to say like a parody, but it's so cartoonish and less like less pure horror than the first one?
Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of Hooper knew he didn't want to just do what he did the first time again.
Yeah,
and he was definitely feeling a little bit after because also it came last after doing Life Force or Invaders from Mars, which had some, I wouldn't say production troubles, but like he definitely got a better look at what making movies with money inside of a system looks like. Yep. He was definitely getting a little bit more cynical about that by the time he made Texas Chainsaw 2, and just the way that you market and sell horror and entertainment in that kind of way.
And yeah. I think that's something you see is in the text of Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Yeah,
is his distaste and cynicism about his work at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. So either way, this is a really awesome period of Tobe Hooper's career, and Chris is right that this is like basically the middle chapter and the one chapter of his career where he was getting like big money to make movies. Like Life Force is like an expensive movie that they thought they were asking, like they asked Hooper to make a blockbuster with that one.
And that's what he did. I love it.
Yep.
Canon thought that this was going to be like their Star Wars or something.
They thought that a lot.
Hell yeah.
As it turns out.
Yeah, anytime that they're like space, it's the next Star Wars.
Exactly. But that being said, I think we are going to just jump right into it. So we're going to start here with Life Force.
Life Force.
Close your eyes.
Visited you how?
In my mind.
Let it go!
It's already spreading. You didn't stop it. It's too late.
Come. Be with me.
Life Force. The terror has just begun.
All right, we are talking Life Force, the 1985 British science fiction horror film directed by Tobe Hooper and written by, obviously, Dan O'Bannon as well as Don Jacoby. For anyone who hasn't seen the film, it loosely follows a bunch of astronauts on the space shuttle called the Churchill, because they're British, and that's it. Who happen to be investigating a ship that they find near, I think they call it Halley's Comet.
Halley's Comet, yeah.
Halley's Comet.
Is it? Yeah.
And they find a space shuttle there that's something like 150 meters wide, and they're kind of freaking out about it. And on board, they find some very naked, very frozen in time, human-looking aliens who may also be vampires who want to suck people's literal life force out using beams and kickstart an apocalypse.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Good, simple film.
And I love
nailed it.
And I guess they start right off the bat with like the one astronaut like clearly expresses physical attraction to Matilda May. in this way that he's just like, I think he says something like, I've been in space for so long, she looks absolutely perfect. And I do like the set of the tone, like them floating into this like artery tube, you know, into the lair and things like that. It's got a very cool aesthetic for the first, especially for like the first 15 minutes, because it's purely in space, and it was really impressive, actually.
Well, it should be noted right off the bat, obviously, that this was written by Dan O'Bannon, who was also the writer behind Alien.
Beautiful.
And also, you know, things like Total Recall. He also, this has a little bit of similarity with John Carpenter's Dark Star as well, from 1974, which it actually predates Alien as kind of like the blue collar in space kind of idea that they have going on there.
Oh, cool.
It's very goofy. It's a really goofy movie. That's
it's very goofy,
it.
though. Yeah, it's clearly a film student's movie.
I like something I found interesting too, though, just in the title sequence, like in the opening credits. The score is very very grand and big, and kind of gives me like this adventure feel rather than horror. And I find it interesting because it starts with that tone, and then throughout the middle, I mean, I get a pretty much pure science fiction horror vibe, and then at the end, it also ends with this kind of like adventurous
it goes back to like
score.
an action adventure fantasy aspect
and
to it almost.
I didn't mind it.
But that's when you can sense the canon wants him to make a sci-fi blockbuster. They literally gave him so much money, and they were like, we think that this is going to be like you know, I mean, I think they said that they approached Michael Winner at one point to make this, so I don't even think they intended this to be horror at one point, because Michael Winner is not particularly a horror filmmaker, as we know.
This would have been a disaster under Michael Winner.
Absolutely.
Oh my God. I can't even, like, I didn't know that. I mean, the score is Mancini, and like it's interesting that he got this collection of people to do this movie, or that Cannon also got these people to do this. Like, this is the guy who did Charade and the Pink Panther.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah. Wow.
Yeah, he also did Touch of Evil. That's the one I was thinking of. Yeah, so I was like, he's done like classical Hollywood scores and stuff like that.
Yeah, that's the vibe it gave me for sure. And I found it interesting, that contrast is very I mean, it ended up kind of working for me, because I guess once it sets in with that first 15 minutes, it like kind of starts as the space adventure, but then it just kind of slowly goes into the horror as the aliens start to do more things. So it was well, cool.
And Hooper was given, obviously, like a bunch of 70 millimeter film stock to actually like make this on, which is absolutely insane. The fact that there are 70 millimeter prints that exist of this like out in the world and people sometimes watch them is insane. I would love to see this like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, there is just like a bizarre mix of like Tobe Hooper, who has like a low budget horror sensibility, and then like this very expensive 80s sci-fi fantasy adventure thing going on. I honestly got a little bit of like, it reminded me a tiny bit of Krull. Yep. In that it mixes sort of like sci-fi and fantasy. Like, it doesn't take the fantasy to the next level of like Conan levels of fantasy or anything like Krull does, and it doesn't go quite as like princesses and princes and stuff like that. But it does have a little bit of that goofiness sometimes, which can also be attributed to Dan O'Bannon and Hooper were huge fans of Hammer horror, which you can tell that they are hugely riffing on when they get when they get into sort of like the dialogue talkie and the philosophical angle between like the cop and the scientist talking about like you know, how they view death, and one views it as like a tangible sort of thing that needs to be solved, and the other views it as more of like a metaphysical, philosophical thing to explore, as like mortality is. And like, so when it was like very proper British people talking about that stuff, I was like, oh, this isn't like pure horror, and it's not 80s fantasy trash anymore either. It's like something in the middle. And then Hooper obviously also got to piss Cannon off by just throwing in as much explicit like sex themes into it as he could possibly fit. Basically confirming that it would never get a you know, like an actual blockbuster following of any kind, because it's just inappropriate in that way.
Yeah.
The feeling I get with Hooper, like having this cadre of talent with him, it's much. It's similar to me Sean Connery having the entire Marine Corps with him in The Rock. Like this guy, this dirty guy who doesn't who's been in jail for God knows how long. And then all of a sudden he gets literally this team of Alpha Squad crazy guys who are going to go into fucking The Rock. That's what I kept on going back to when I think of the talent he has here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Patrick Stewart too. He gets Patrick Stewart in this damn movie.
Oh yeah, I forgot.
Yeah, it's
his little.
it's crazy.
It's kind of it's a very small part, and he has to just kind of become possessed. And I don't think I've ever seen Patrick Stewart not play the kind of proper gentleman, the leader, the very stoic. He has it all together, and to watch him just kind of spaz out in this as he's becoming taken over is awesome.
The blood scene is so freaking good.
That's one of the best images in the film, actually, because that's one thing about Hooper too, is he was always capable of finding, even in these very silly moments where maybe the effects don't hold up in certain ways, he was always able to find a really unique image. And when Patrick Stewart has blood leaking out of every open hole in his face, and then it forms into the girl. Matilda May's sort of space girl. They don't even really give her a name. That's all she is.
Yeah.
And then they're looking at a body formed out of just liquid blood that's sitting there. It's pretty incredible. And it predates James Cameron doing The Abyss, the digital water effects in The Abyss, which is kind of a similar effect.
Well, that's why I don't think he gets it. Why these movies are so good is because all these movies, all three of them, you can see the work going into the visual effects still. As he gets more into the 90s and into 2000s, the CG, he can't help because of the costs. He can't help but use CGI. And the problem with that is that you never see, other than it looks terrible, is that you just never see the work.
Yeah.
Whereas this, it's very blatant. That you were somebody had to do something crazy to allow that to happen.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and I love the design of the once they get the life sucked out of them, they have this. It's not your traditional looking body that has
a zombie.
Yeah, because a similar a movie that kind of does the whole thing and it does it almost just literally and you see it physically happen is The Mummy. You remember with Brendan Fraser, and the mummy goes around and he sucks the life out of people. For that one, it seems more of a a traditional what it would look like as a body, but this one has this almost zombie-like thing because they use animatronics or whatever.
Yep.
And it's I don't know, it adds this layer of something that isn't human, and it's very very cool, very effective.
Well, and also when they start moving around and stuff like that, they have the animatronics faces opening up and reaching,
yelling and screaming. Yeah,
very creepy. There's very tactile visual effects that they're doing, courtesy of I think it was John Dykstra, the guy who was known for doing obviously Star Wars, the original Star Wars, but also one we talked about on the show that had pretty neat visual effects. Clint Eastwood's Firefox.
Oh yeah.
That is an interesting movie.
It is a very interesting movie.
So he did all of the jet combat stuff in that, and he has since become actually Tarantino's VFX guy.
Oh, nice.
So that's what Dijkstra is up to lately. So he does a lot of very cool practical effects, and overall the way that it fits into Hooper, who was very good at mixing sort of artificial qualities into his film, because we talked about Eaten Alive, but the thing that's so cool about Eaten Alive is that it is the most natural base setting he could have picked for a horror movie, a swamp with a killer alligator, but
it still looks like a stage.
He had to shoot it on a soundstage. So instead of trying to hide that, he basically just upped the surreal elements to basically be none of this is real in a sense the way that you're watching it. So I can just go full primary color lighting. And that's the way that he kind of tackled space a little bit too. That opening scene when they're going into the ship, it's just there's the very tactile ship design that is a little bit cribbed from Alien. There's little egg sacs, and there's a little bit of the machinery as a living organism and pipes that look like veins, and there's the difference is that they have bat-like creatures that are also kind of floating around in it and whatnot. But when they're floating towards it, he has this huge green primary lit artificial color all over it as the astronauts kind of like form a line and move into it. And it actually reminded me a lot of Brian De Palma's Mission to Mars, which basically has like just this kind of very cheesy kind of like image making to it, but it's still very like visually arresting in terms of like the style and the scale of it. And you know, it's something that like really separates a filmmaker who knows how to work within limitations that they have. And he's like, look, this isn't going to be as expensive as other sci-fi blockbusters, even though this is probably the most expensive movie I'll ever make. So let's find stylistic ways to make that look different than what you've seen before.
Yeah, and it's a perfect image for the whole movie, because like the outside of it, it looks like Gandalf's staff a little bit.
Yeah,
like
sure.
From the outside, but inside, like they look like they're traveling through the Vas Defrons. Like that first shot of them going down the tube, and I'm like, oh, so outside there's this fantasy like incredible image, and then inside it's like all sex.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then the rest of the movie is honestly a bunch of horny scientists who start the apocalypse because they just really want to have sex with the alien vampire zombie girl.
Yeah,
like that's literally the rest of the movie. Is that she is everyone looks at her and is like, damn, and then she uses that to her advantage and sucks the life out of them and turns them into zombies, and then starts the zombie apocalypse with the end goal of, I guess, like sucking everyone's soul and
at least all of London
doing something or other.
The sequences too, when she's just starts like, we start to see her go to like parks and stuff, and they'll show up after where, you know, she sucked the life out of a body or whatever. It kind of reminded me, as we were following her every once in a while, of Under the Skin a little bit.
Yeah,
a
little bit,
and it was cool. I think I mean, it wouldn't surprise me if that movie took, you know, inspiration from this, because I mean, Alien, going around town, sucking the life out of people, you know, that
an
kind
alien
of thing.
succubus,
using their, you know, sexual desires to do so. So yeah, that was really interesting and cool to see that.
Mm-hmm. And a little bit of the Terminator with how they always show up like naked and walking around.
Yeah.
She's always walking around naked like that.
For sure.
But I one thing I like is just how absolutely like crazy Hooper went with the sexual elements, to the point where they can't even stop talking about it.
Yeah.
Like all they do is they're horny, and like that's overtly in the text, is that she is a succubus using that against them. But at the same time, they have so much regret over being horny at the same time, and the way that they like try to like vocalize their experience. Like the one guy who's like, that is the most overwhelmingly effeminate presence I've ever encountered.
Yeah.
And then they were like, was it sexual? And he's like, yes, overwhelmingly so.
It was horrible.
Lost control. Yeah.
I love it. It's like when he's like, it was horrible. Like, because it, like, as he's, you know, explaining it, we've seen the bad, so obviously we know. But if you were to just like explain it, it was just like he was so attracted, you know, she was so beautiful. And then at the end, just like putting that little asterisk, it's just, but it was
ruining his
just
life.
Fucking horrible. Yeah, it was the worst thing ever.
Yeah, that's that the post-climax shame he's getting there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but she eventually escapes the lab that they were holding her in, where the scientists and the military were kind of holding her in, and starts infecting the world. And they get so hung up on, like, the one guy is so attracted to her, and so sort of like upset about how attracted to her he is, that he's like, I feel like I need to be the one to take her down.
Yeah.
And they're so focused on that, they forget about the two other guys who can also do the same thing, which ends up spreading the apocalypse a little bit. And there is just some funny images of just like military guys like machine gunning these two naked space vampire men and like riddling them with holes as they
they light
to, like,
them
walk
up
forward.
Yeah.
But yeah, and also those animatronics of like the walking skeleton corpses that are like barely alive, like moving around, and it reminded me a little bit of
bursting into dust. That was great too.
The bursting into dust is a really cool effect, but when they're still alive, it gave me that same feeling of like that one guy he finds in Seven who has all the fucking
good call.
Car fresheners hanging in there and has been just like barely kept alive.
Yeah, they look so close to death. Like that's the design. Yeah.
John C. McGinley might have shown up in this and said, "Oh fuck, he's alive! Oh fuck, he's alive!" I mean, the thing with what I really love about like he doesn't like the sexuality isn't he doesn't a lot this movie gets a lot of claims of sexism because of obviously she's naked for most of it, even though I didn't find the shooting particularly erotic until towards the end. I thought it was kind of a little more sterile on that sense. But like the idea, like when he goes to see Patrick Stewart at the hospital while they're looking for him, and he just starts making out with Patrick Stewart, because he thinks that's her, and well, he knows that it's her at that point. But like, I'm like, oh Jesus, like it's just like sexual obsession. Like, it has nothing to do with like.
It's not just Matilda May.
Yes, exactly. It has, and that's why I was like. It was funny to me because I had forgotten that is the twist that the two male aliens are doing all the destruction back home. Because it is a weird thing. Like you would think they would almost like those two guys who shoot the guys might have been attracted to them too.
Right.
Yeah, true. That was my first thought, but that didn't. It's funny that they do it that way.
Yeah.
Well, and also they have her sort of like explicated too, that like. Her entire visual existence is also entirely projection. She is actually a shapeshifter, and she goes into their heads, and she talks about how the image that she's taken was completely ripped from their minds. I think she says, "I took shape from your mind. I became the woman in your deepest mind. I am the feminine inside you." Is the line that she gets. So, like, again, it is just, like, these extremely horny men's projections that they are ruining themselves and ruin the world at the same time. So, like, if they didn't have these sexual hangups about the situation, they would probably be handling a little bit better. Maybe not entirely better. We've seen a lot of horror movies about how the military handles science fiction horror experiences. But they would definitely be less distracted.
That might help.
Which is definitely built into the character experience that we're watching.
Well, yeah, and you couldn't ask for a better avatar than Steve Railsback, who is just really good at expressing like trauma and sexual like dysfunction in his brain and obsession. Like he just has that, like, I forget, it's Dwayne something in the X-Files, but he's a major part of the X-Files. And I mean, it's also what makes him completely, whenever they try to put him in anything where he's not playing a character like this, it just doesn't work. Like there's this E.T. ripoff called Nuki that he did, and it's just, he's so wrong because he's doing this kind of performance again in a kid's movie, essentially. But I love him in this. I think he's so perfect to be able to express what the character is going through. And I think Hooper really locked onto that.
Oh, definitely. And I think that like we've talked about how it kind of has like these three different genre elements that Hooper is kind of switching between a little bit. But I think that also makes some of like the sex elements like a little bit more shocking, because like when he's doing the Hammer horror vibe a little bit on Earth, he's doing like this classy British vampire movie a little bit, and then he just starts throwing in like succubus boobs and sci-fi trash elements and like a bats being stabbed by giant iron swords and zombie gore.
Like it gets super fantastical at a certain point. Like it's just it's not even really like science fiction. It's just like it's pure fantasy in that regard.
Yeah, Hooper took like all these different genres and was like, what if I just spent all of Cannon's money to do like a bizarre like sex and death exploitation riff, basically, where Patrick Stewart's like blood literally transforms into a beautiful woman. And then our heroes have a giant laser beam shooting out of a cathedral where there is a giant bat creature who needs to be stabbed to death with specifically a giant iron sword. Like straight out of Conan or something.
That's what that's what I'm saying. It really does look like something out of Conan or something along those lines for sure, or Beastmaster or any of those kind of things, you know.
Well, yeah, and Frank Finley plays the like head scientist or whatever, and he gets infected and he starts becoming a little bit more like curious about like what this post vampire succubus existence is gonna look like, and he starts becoming a little bit romantic about it. He has a big monologue near the end where he talks about how perfect it is that it's like the crypt of kings and queens, and I think that's when he gets shot by Steve Railsbag, and he's very excited to be like, here I go, and he gets sort of like added to the pile of bodies and souls that are sort of like feeding her. And again, seeing like all this, like when he grabs that sword and gets in the car and starts driving through like downtown London, and there's all these like miniatures and explosions and 70 millimeter like photography of like this apocalyptic situation. And I think one guy on the radio even says London is on the brink of the worst devastation since the Blitz. There's martial law, like things like this. And I was like, this is like the biggest thing Hooper had to have attempted.
Yeah.
Oh, for sure. And like he gets the chaos of it so right. Like he's not trying to curtail it or anything. Like you can tell he just wanted absolute chaos to be on screen. And that's what I think another thing that these three movies share is a real ability to express through images the feeling of madness. And of not of just like social madness, but also like of Railsback and the other, like Finley too. I mean, that scene with him, is it with Firth or is it with Railsback that is it?
I can't remember.
I feel like it's Firth.
Yeah, it might actually be Firth, because Railsback, I think, is the one, he ends up stabbing himself with her, right? He's the one who's at the cathedral with her. And Firth is the detective who I think would be the one who shoots Finley and grabs the sword to go and help Railsbag. Yeah,
heavy duty Hayden and Sellers and Dr. Strangelove feeling for me in that scene.
Yes.
I got that heavy because especially with like the apocalypse going on in the background. There's a red sky in the back. So I mean, it's those scenes I think any other director would just try to get through, and you can tell he really wants to give weight to this.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, because he's definitely interested in not just like what is physically being done by the aliens, but he's very interested in people's like psychotic reaction to it. And like there's a lot of like intense in always Hooper movies, there's always these intense close-ups of these sweaty people who get a little bit out of their minds or get a little bit sort of like absurd in some of their performances, which many people do in this, but maybe more so in some of the ones we're going to talk about later.
Yeah, it just gets
I was really taken though by how visually insane this gets with the laser beam coming in. He drilled the giant fucking bat creature who's there.
I like how when he was walking up the like courthouse stairs or whatever, there's just like bodies just everywhere on the staircase. Like there's a lot of destruction and chaos around by the end of it. I think at one point a bus blows up and then you see like 3 people just on fire, just running around and shit. Like it's just chaotic. Very entertaining.
And that this does end in a very cathartic penetration image of Railsbag impaling her and himself with the sword.
Yeah.
And kind of like letting like the beam of light get sort of like infected by that act, and then going up to the ship and like exploding, and just absolutely fucking crazy, especially because again all of the imagery actually is sort of like previously set up and makes sense in the story that we're watching, but also the fact that again Hooper was sort of promising canon that this was going to be sort of like a blockbuster adventure story, so like the very traditional orchestral soundtrack that gets put on
all this
during that stuff
it's like because it starts with that and ends with that,
you're kind of like that was not the vibe of the characters.
That wrap up is so funny to me. Like, it was like, to me, because, I mean, obviously they did it because they just had to set the tone, and I guess, canon was like, this is what we want. But for me, I got to read it as Toby just kind of like, I tricked you, right? That was an adventurous, just traditional science fiction movie. Here's the score that tells you that right here.
We had a great time.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, wrapped it up neatly. No weirdness. It was great.
That's also, I think, Alan Hume is an MVP for canon. He shot this and he shot Runaway Train, which is incredible if you haven't seen it.
I've never seen Runaway Train.
I have not, no.
Oh man, if you ever want to not hate Jon Voight, watch that movie for just a little bit. I mean, you should hate him and everything, but like for 1 minute, if you just want to not hate him, he's so fucking good in that movie.
I didn't know Hume also did Return of the Jedi.
Yeah.
That makes a lot more sense that Canon hired him for this.
Did some Bond movies too, which kind of fits into the London, Hammer thing.
True. Makes sense. Yeah, I've also never seen Legend of Hell House, but that's one I've been meaning to watch for like a long time.
Me too. I haven't never seen that one.
I just watched John Hughes' The Incubus with John Cassavetes not too long ago.
It's a weird one,
rape
right?
Demon. Yeah. Either way, no need to digress into that. I think we should pivot towards a reductive rating round before we start talking about John Cassavetes doing SVU for the Rosemary's Baby Satan character.
Sounds interesting.
But it's definitely something we're going to talk about at some point. It's a Vinegar Syndrome film. I just picked it up on their sale randomly and last.
Gotcha.
Yeah, this one, Life Force, I gotta say, this one gets like the decent 4 from me. I think it's just an awesome artifact that, you know, at one point Toby Hooper, like an absolute madman, was actually given like serious money to make a 70mm science fiction blockbuster. And he was given at least enough freedom to turn in whatever the hell he wanted, because he did. And he brings all of his, low budget horror sensibility and tries to merge it a little bit with what he's been asked to make and sort of like the 80s fantasy adventure stuff that he's doing there. But then he also gets to go back to his Hammer horror roots, which is something he just talks about a lot, that he grew up watching Hammer horror films. So he was very excited to throw some of that in. But then also to turn it into a very explicit sex and death exploitation horror film at the same time, with like a sexy space vampire succubus sucking light beams out of people, and zombie creatures running around getting shot at, and giant fucking bats both suspended in space and trying to kill people inside of a, London cathedral. And like, it's just like, as soon as you start describing things that happen in this movie, it's more insane than it even sort of like feels like watching it, which I guess is like maybe a credit to Hooper, that somehow you don't, like, your brain doesn't melt watching this movie. Like it does actually make some semblance of sense. Like the logic of the movie is there. Despite the fact that as soon as I feel like I pitch this to someone, they'll be like, what the hell are you talking about? So it's very weird as hell, and I got nothing to respect it. And also it's very horny, but also very regretfully horny, which is a very interesting state of mind to be in while you're watching vampire, zombie, bats and swords and stuff. So credit to Hooper on that.
Yeah, I would. I'd also give it a 4. It's pretty strong for me. I just had a blast with this. Just the amount of places that this goes is truly unbelievable. Starting off in space, just having those awesome images of the astronauts just floating through it and going through the artery and all that, and then leading to more of a, what, like that traditional kind of 80s stuff where we see the zombies and the bursting into dust, and then watching all these men be hopelessly hypnotized by Matilda May, which I completely understand, is just endlessly entertaining. And then we get the wrap up, which it just goes so many places. And once again, to have that very traditional score to open and close it with all this in between, it's just so funny to me. And yeah, I love Toby Hooper. My God, he's just a wild man. So 4 out of 5 for sure.
Yeah, it's the same for me. I think this is a perfect movie for like Poltergeist, which I do really like that movie. But this, to me, it's the fact that it is based on such a primitive idea, and but you also have this huge budget and this like all this shit going on top of it. It is perfect for what he was transitioning into at the time, like from very primitive productions made on no money to this humongous, like he is at once, paying homage to everything that came before with him while also trying to go to the next level. And he kind of pisses everybody off by doing it. I can't help but love it. Like I really can't help. I mean, it's entertaining as hell too. That should be said, but to me, it's so perfect for what he was going through at the time.
Yeah, and was this a hit? By the way, I didn't know if we mentioned that. Did people enjoy this? Like general audience members enjoy this when it came out?
I don't think it was a hit based on how much it cost. It did
Gotcha.
okay.
Gotcha.
Like it actually didn't. It wasn't like the worst movie that's ever opened at the box office by far, but it was up until this point Toby Hooper's most expensive movie. I'm pretty sure. I think it was like $6 or $7 million or something like that.
Okay.
So it was very expensive for him and for Canon, and I mean we will talk about it at a certain point, but like Canon was very close to going bankrupt, and they did go bankrupt in what, like 2 years later after this.
Oh damn.
Yeah. So
might have been Toby.
Yeah, Hooper's. We got some other films to credit for that as well, and a little bit of Canon's own decision making at a certain point. Well, we've tied in another episode on Canon movies for next week.
Gotcha.
Where we are actually going to talk about for sure the end of Canon.
You're talking about like later era Bronson and Norris stuff.
No, we're going to be talking about Cyborg.
Oh boy!
And Cyborg exists literally because they were going bankrupt, and they literally just reused costumes from like other productions that they were supposed to be doing.
Wow.
I think they were supposed to be doing a Masters of the Universe and Spider-Man live action films, and they lost the rights at the last minute after having built all of the costuming and sets for them. And then they were like, "Holy shit, we need to repurpose this into another movie." Instantly. Yeah. So they basically had Albert like look at all of the costumes and stuff, and we're like, "Can you write something that uses these?"
Yes.
Didn't they also put Albert on the unfinished journey to the center of the earth that they were trying to do? Like,
yes.
He got like half of it done, and then they just went bankrupt.
Oh man.
Yep. Yeah, they had him working on a Johnny Guitar remake with John Travolta at that time too.
Man, I would die to see that.
Yeah, wow.
So Canon, this is, I think, around the time that Canon maybe was making some interesting decisions that weren't paying off, and maybe some bad decisions at the same time. And within basically 2 years, they would go bankrupt based on some of these movies that they were. Invaders from Mars might have been part of that. I didn't see how much money that one made. It doesn't look like very much.
I don't think so. No.
But I imagine Texas Chainsaw must have done okay.
I think both this and I think Life Force and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 did, okay, did enough. Like probably broke even, maybe. But like Invaders from Mars was definitely the outlier here.
Gotcha.
Well, and also we should keep in mind that it's because they were giving Toby Hooper like real money, like more money than he had ever been given to make stuff. Like later things like what they would give Albert. Like Albert was there for, like the less than $1 million productions that they could make money on because they had like Van Damme or Chuck Norris in it or something.
Right.
Whereas Hooper, this was some of the most expensive productions they ever did. Invaders from Mars actually I think is the most expensive, which we're speaking of which we should probably jump on into. It's a good segue. Let's move along here. We're going to talk next Invaders from Mars.
You okay, Dad?
Fine.
Because something strange is happening to the people of Willow Creek.
Everything's fine now.
And David Gardner is about to find out why.
David! I'm gonna find my mom and dad! No! David Gardner!
Canon Films presents Toby Hooper's Invaders from Mars. There's no place on Earth to hide.
All right, we are back, and we are talking Invaders from Mars, the 1986 American science fiction horror film directed by Toby Hooper, and also written by Dan O'Bannon and Don Jacoby.
Damn.
He reused a lot of the same crew. He even brought back John Dykstra to do a lot of the special effects again, but he also included this time Stan Winston, because he had some very important creature effects that needed to go into making this film, which we're going to talk about the reasons why. So he needed the guy who worked on Aliens, Terminator, and Predator, and known for doing a lot of the creature effects for those films to come on and make the creatures that he was going to work on. for this one. But for anyone who hasn't seen Invaders from Mars, it is a remake of the classic 1950s science fiction film, which I haven't seen, and I honestly haven't heard a whole lot about, other than that, like the plot is loosely similar, but it sounds like Toby took it in some more like real horror direction, especially with the way that he shows a lot of the aliens. Sounds like the original in a lot of 50s ways is just like a little bit campier. It's a little bit of like sort of like the 50s Blob versus the 80s Blob.
Yeah, I just watched the original last night, actually, for the first time. It's done by Menzies, who did Things to Come. That's on Criterion. It's a really good little movie. It's, the original is very funny. Like it's trying to be more humorous and like, oh, gee, Williker, I'm being shot at. Kind of stuff. And I kind of it's enjoyable for what it is, but this is one of those movies where I'm like, and I know people don't like the remake that much, but it is to me much better than the original.
Interesting. Well, I could see that, because like I am of the mind that the Blob, Chuck Russell's Blob remake, is like way better than the original Blob, and I could see this being a similar situation, just where you get like, like these sort of like just sort of pump up those horror elements in ways that is like a little bit more tangible. And I feel like that's a really important part, because Tobe Hooper here is very clearly making in sort similar to what we've talked about before with things like Dolls and things like People Under the Stairs. Like he has made a what kind of works as a children's adventure story, but he has thrown in like just real deal horror elements that come from, someone like a madman like Tobe Hooper, who has like a very overactive imagination in that way. And again, you get a little bit of tonal clashing there, which is, I think, probably something that people kind of reject about it in some ways. But I don't know, that's never really bothered me in the same way that it seems to do other people.
The more that I watch these kind of movies where it's like the kids movie that's rated R kind of vibe, I like them. I really enjoy the tonal contrast. I feel like it kind of gives you that vibe of like when you're a kid and you're watching something you shouldn't be watching, that kind of thing. Yeah. I really like it.
Yeah, I like the fact that it's very it takes the terror and the uncertainty of like change in family in society as actually terrifying and actually like destabilizing for the kid. Yeah. That's like very rare.
When he starts to, it is kind of scary to like watch him start to be extremely uncomfortable with his dad, where it's like, and then eventually his mom as well. It's because, the parents, when you're at that age, obviously, are your only kind of source of protection and normalcy or whatever. And when they're acting as if, they're aliens, it's definitely an uncomfortable thing. And I think they express that pretty well.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely has a little bit of that body snatchers kind of element, where like they're aliens in human bodies, and they're people and you kind of have to wrestle with the sort of like surreal quality of like feeling like you don't know who you're talking to, even if they're literally like your closest family member, like your father. Yeah. And for anyone who hasn't seen it, it does loosely follow a boy whose home is invaded by these like giant tentacle brain meatballs with legs aliens who take over the minds of people and including like people at his school. And he finds the boy is kind of like the only person who sort of like realizes what's happening here, and slowly reveals to sort of like a school nurse at school, and eventually the U.S. Marines that there is something nefarious taking place here that they are kind of uncertain about. There's something unknowable out there, but it's dark and scary. And what's interesting about Hooper's approach to this is that, I mean, I don't know, and I don't think any of us know, or will probably never know, what it is that happened on Poltergeist. There's endless debate over the Spielberg-produced horror film that Tobe Hooper directed, that apparently Spielberg and Hooper had very different sensibilities on the way that the movie should go, but neither of them being, I guess both of them being professionals, will never talk about it. So we will never figure out exactly what happened on that movie. But this is the closest I've seen ever to someone doing an overt parody of Spielberg.
Yeah.
So I'm very curious if this was Hooper getting that out of his system, because like this is, in terms of sort of like the scenes of sort of like the domestic American family in a science fiction reality, it has a little bit of Close Encounters. It has a little bit of the creature feature stuff of Jaws.
Yeah.
It has a little bit of the alien stuff from the kid's point of view in E.T. This even has a frog classroom scene from E.T. He even steals the dolly zoom from Jaws. And so I was sitting here going like, okay, this is, and then obviously also doing the domestic family stuff and the military power stuff as well. And the only difference is that his aliens aren't cute, and the military power doesn't really seem to have a great time getting rid of the aliens in this one. So he's kind of merged a lot of these Spielberg, these popular sort of like American styles that Spielberg was honing in on and making huge, and given it a little bit of a 50s B-movie absurdity and a little bit of adventure, and then also taking the alien creature effects as far as he could possibly take it and doing something way fucking scarier and grosser than Spielberg would ever think about doing.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting that the military angle to me is very interesting, because in the original, it's like mostly about the military. They're much more prevalent in it.
That's interesting, because they don't get introduced until like the back third of the movie almost.
Yeah, they're from relatively early on in the original, and whereas in Spielberg, military is either good guys or like very nefarious guys. Like it's one or the other thing. This, like, they're dumbfounded. For the most part.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that they're literally being led by a kid at one point.
Yeah. That was one of my favorite parts, when he just busts into the office and just starts to control a general of the United States Army and shit like that. Well, and
it's really funny the way that it dramatically plays out too, because he breaks in and he tells them their story, and they basically do like the raised eyebrow, like, we don't know, like, what the fuck, and then like literally the aliens blow up their Mars rocket, and immediately the general's like, it's fucking aliens. The kid's right.
It's right. Gotta be the aliens.
No, let this kid look at my neck. Go ahead, look at my neck, kid.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's a great time. But the thing I think that like really works for me about this one, because I do think that there is something like that he's kind of being a little bit intentionally a little bit derivative of like some of the stuff that Spielberg would do, but he's making slight subversions in a way, in a very humorous way, which is I think what he's angling to do, because at this point he does seem a little bit jaded about making movies with money, and other people who find success making things that he kind of finds are like a little bit sillier. And so it seems like he's almost intentionally heightening the silliness in a way that people I don't think really appreciated, but it seems like Hooper is doing it like intentionally.
At one point there's a shot, I think it's after someone gets eaten by one of the aliens, and one of the aliens, the other aliens in the background, start to laugh, like they're like, that's one of the best parts. Right? And it's just like, that gave me such a campy like comedy vibe in that regard. It's definitely tongue-in-cheek in probably the whole thing, really. There's a lot of like wackiness to it and that kind of stuff. So yeah,
I think with Louise Fletcher is where I feel the most subversion of Spielberg, because you would definitely have a character like this in a Spielberg movie, but she would just be very stern. And maybe at the end you might find out like, oh, she's actually kind of nice, or she has this bravery to her. And like, you have her eating frogs, like looking like she's hung over all the time, and then she gets eaten by a meatball. Like, it's so perfect to like just be like, no, let's go all the way with this. Let's follow this to the end.
And then you have this like giant brain that is attached to some type of long like tentacle or something that seems to live in a hole in the wall, and like it's just the most bizarre shit. And I also love that the creature design, At first I thought, because I think they're stationary at first, I thought that they were just going to be like these big blobs, and they are. But then you see them with legs, and they're actually walking around, and so it's actually people in suits, and it just looks so big and bulky that it kind of looks like you'd be incapable of having a human being in a suit like that, and not having him just like roll over and roll down one of the set hills or something like that. But that I found interesting, that you have like wide shots of them actually walking around their space station and stuff. It's just such a bizarre image.
The brain character is my number one on my list of reasons why Tobe Hooper should have been the guy to direct Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, because his Krang would have been out of this world.
That would have been sweet to have him do a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles movie. My God.
An R-rated Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles where all the turtles look like, I don't know, the guy who gets into the waste factory in RoboCop.
Yeah.
Like you just, I can't stop thinking about this. I also have a very personal connection to this movie because it was one of the first, even Hooper and a lot of directors talk about like the first time they saw a horror movie and like what it did to them. I remember this was one of the first like quote unquote horror movies I had seen ever. And I saw it in my uncle's basement when I was like sleeping over in Maryland. And he just had a TV down there and I was just watching stuff on TV and this came on and I remember the meatballs and that brain so clearly. Yeah. And like, I didn't find out it was a Hooper movie until I was like in my 20s. But I was obsessed with this, and I had these images of like, oh my God, you can make things like that on TV?
Yeah.
Like, I was like, holy crap, okay. So I think that's why I forgive this maybe more than I should, technically, because I do have such a connection to it.
Mm. Yeah, because I was kind of watching this for the first time, and I definitely appreciated like a lot of what he's going for, and especially a lot of the effects work that I especially liked the detail of like the glowing little like pineal gland from beyond that bursts out of the back of their neck that they like talk through. Yeah, like that kind of stuff like really freaks me out. That kind of like body horror. And also I really liked that the meatball blobs that walk around all have like really giant teeth. I don't know why the fact that they all have like a giant mouth, like they're like Little Shop of Horrors.
It's very much something like that. Yeah, for sure.
And I also appreciated too the sand pit effects that they kept doing, where people kept getting sucked
like the
into
whirlpool
the sand, like
of
left
sand.
and right.
Yeah,
that's directly from the original, by the way.
Oh, really?
The sand stuff is you don't see like. It's essentially like they show a hole opening up in sand, and then like somebody jumps and then falls down.
Right.
Like, oh, they got sucked in. Oh no.
Why in the original? Why are the Martians attacking Earth?
I think they
are Martians, right? That's what it's decided.
Yeah. At the end, like there is a brain creature at the end, similar. Like the actual like the meatballs are essentially just Day the Earth Stood Still aliens. Like they're kind of just like they have like bigger eyes, but they essentially have that look to them. And I think if I remember, it's a similar thing of like, we need to, our planet has been dying and like we have to find a new one kind of thing.
Right.
And it has something to do. I can't remember if I feel like they mentioned it in this one, that it has something to do with. They also thought that the development of like exploration rockets was like yes. Military missiles or something like that.
Yeah.
So like they actually thought that like Earth was attacking first. So that's why they blow up the rocket, I'm pretty sure, in this film. So we kind of added like another element. I wasn't sure if that was in the original or not, because they only briefly mentioned it in this one, and it almost doesn't matter because it seemed like Hooper was trying to put in an explanation for the Martians.
Yeah.
And then but also just wanting to go in the direction of because like unlike sort of like some of the Blob elements, which is about sort of like being afraid of the unknown, whereas like the military and sort of like a martial law police state is like pretty much just as fucking scary. This one goes with, no, the aliens are really fucking scary. They're the scariest thing.
Right now we need to deal with the aliens. These
giant the aliens are actually the scariest thing. Yeah. we don't like this shit.
I mean, I think my only major issue with this movie is Hunter Carlson is terrible.
The kid?
The kid is,
yeah, he is pretty
really
bad.
And I'm
some
usually,
of it like works for me because of like his like just super innocence, but his delivery at times is kind of, you know, a little cringy for sure.
yeah.
Well, and I would say too, the only thing that really makes it work for me is that it does seem Hooper is being a bit tongue in cheek about his use of genre here.
Exactly.
That he does seem like he's not trying to, I think, get like that Spielberg kid performance of something a little bit more natural. It seems like he's making something that feels like that, but heightened to an absurd degree. So when the kid is like, I really liked when the kid was screaming at the brain and the meatballs, being like, "You can't control people. It's wrong.
Yeah,
and I will go to detention
Giving
every
him, like,
day
a
after
moral
school
argument.
for the rest of my life. If you like stop doing this." And then I think they're just laughing at him. And I also really thought it was
I like
cute
that too. Yeah.
That the kid, the worst punishment he can imagine is that he will go to detention for the rest of his life.
Yeah, especially after he's seen like what the aliens are capable of doing too. But he's just like, no, it's fine. Like, I'll just go to detention, guys. That'll be enough for you.
Yeah, and that's also
Adorable.
when he yells, "You dick brain,"
Yeah.
at them when he's in like their little Martian lair underneath the sand. And then that's also followed shortly after by the mean school teacher who eats frogs, now being eaten by one of the meatballs. And it's the gag is so good because she is just like being chomped on and her legs are sticking out and they're slowly going in. And the guy and the meatball in the back is just having a blast. He's like, "This is the funniest shit I've ever seen."
I love the callback to her doing the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 right before she gets eaten, like trying to contain control even in a place where you have no control.
Yeah.
I mean, the thing with Carlson is that he's just not good in like the scenes where you have to have him be dramatically stable.
Yeah.
But like you're completely right that he is also. It's good that you have that like wandering, not sure where I am feel to the character in the way he talks like that. And I mean, he was the bigger thing is that he was Karen Black's son, actual son that she had with Kit Carlson, who wrote Paris, Texas, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Oh, and I saw that he was on Paris, Texas too. Hunter Carson. I saw on his like his credits or whatever. So he's definitely getting the roles from mom.
This kid's dad helped co-write Texas Chainsaw 2?
Texas Chainsaw 2 and Paris, Texas.
Yeah, Paris, Texas made sense because that was the kid's also in Paris, Texas, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But I had no idea that he also got brought on. So he must have just got a relationship because Hooper cast his kid.
Hooper and him were friends they were both Texas guys. So
that would make sense. I guess Paris, Texas, Texas Chainsaw.
Yeah,
same movie, you know.
It's funny you brought up the professionalism because he does. I listened to the commentary for the first time on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 with Tobe Hooper. He doesn't talk a lot. Like he doesn't want to share too much. Like when he does, it's amazing. But he always is like, yeah, I forget what happened there. Yeah, I don't know what happened there. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what's going on here.
Liar.
Like, I'm like, I know, you know something here, buddy.
That's so funny too because I watched some of the special features for Texas Chainsaw 2 as well, and I watched the one with all the makeup guys, and their vision of him is so different than like they were always like, yeah, he's very talkative, but only about like the work. And apparently they had like a lot of monetary concerns about like getting the funding like while they were filming Texas Chainsaw a little bit. And like they were like, yeah, none of us knew that. He was just like, yeah, good job, guys. Keep making the bloody things and we'll chop them up later. And like he never brought up the fact that like, you know, he was probably had like so much producer stress on him while he was making that movie, especially because at the same time he was pre-production and cutting Invaders from Mars at the same time, which by the way, what we should mention while we're talking about Invaders from Mars apparently was an absolute fucking disaster. It sounds like Tobe Hooper, who's not an editor, which is interesting because a lot of like very good directors shoot for edits and are editors themselves in a lot of ways, and like they have the vision for how their film is going to be cut. And when Tobe Hooper shot this Invaders from Mars, he obviously had this vision of like this very heightened, sillier but still darker version of like, you know, one of these sort of like 80s Spielberg kids dramas that's vaguely, you know, in the genre realm and taking those genre elements to like an absurdist degree. He knew what he was doing, but the movie went through 4 editors. Because and big editors, like I don't remember the names anymore, but like 3 of them were like Hollywood Time editors who were trying to cut this film, and they couldn't make it work. And Tobe Hooper basically couldn't figure out why they couldn't make it work. And Cannon didn't like it. Nobody liked the movie, and no one was having a great time. So they brought in this random editor from Israel who does comedies. He did Israeli comedy films.
Wow.
And they brought him in, and Cannon brought him in, I guess, because I think he did some, I think he might have took a look at Delta Force for them or something like that. He did some stuff for them. And so he took a look at it, and he watched, I think, what was like the 3rd pass with the 3rd editor. And apparently he was just like, yeah, this just isn't, I see why it's not working. Yeah, give me a shot. And Tobe Hooper was like, you know, what's this random, like, chubby Israeli man going to do to my film to make it work that 3 Hollywood editors can't do? So he left for the weekend and said, do what you can. And he came back and he showed him, I guess, like the first act or 2 of the film that he re-edited. And he was like, that was what I wanted. and that's the film.
That's killer.
So the version that exists was just this random Israeli, not even a genre, and a guy who was unfamiliar with both Texas Chainsaw and unfamiliar with like Spielberg movies. Even he literally just cut comedy films, and he was like, "Yeah, Tobe Hooper's clearly making a comedy film."
Yeah, I mean,
so I think that was what everyone didn't get.
Yeah.
Is that he had all these guys being like, "We're cutting the Texas Chainsaw Massacre dude's film," but Tobe Hooper very clearly made like a very heightened, absurd genre movie to the point.
Well, it's funny because they clearly had still a lot of I think this guy with Jakobowitz, I forget the guy who edited this. He edited Globus and Golem's biggest hit from Israel, Lemon Popsicle. That was the big deal. Like they still had connections to all that whole industry back in Israel because they were huge. They were the biggest money makers in the history of Israeli cinema at the time. They made shit tons of money. I mean, they were insanely popular in Israel. So they took almost a lot of the, like Bose Davidson, who is still making movies, I think. He came over, he directed Lemon Popsicle. That became the basis of The Last American Virgin, which is a wild Cannon movie, if you ever get a chance to see it. But yeah, like, it is interesting to me that they had this connect, like they were taking from 2 pools, Hollywood and the Israeli movie industry.
Yeah, and it's really interesting too because like obviously this guy then got to work on Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, not even having seen the original and not caring for horror movies of any kind. He's like, yeah, not really for me, but I like Tobe Hooper, and I seem to be able to understand what he was going for, and especially because it should be noted too, Invaders from Mars and Texas Chainsaw 2 are overtly Hooper's most like tongue-in-cheek, absurd, to the point of being comic films.
Absolutely.
That he would do. So it does make sense that relationship would work. But pivoting towards reductive rating round on Invaders here. This one gets the high 3 from me, I think. I do appreciate very much what Hooper is going for with this one, and I do think I like it more than like it seems that most people see. It seems like for a lot of Hooper people, this isn't even one that they appreciate too much. But it is interesting to see that like it's just like they don't appreciate it for something that is, once again, the filmmaker seems to be very overtly doing and feeling like a little bit like superior to the film when they're just like, oh, this is like a shitty E.T. And I'm like, well, no, he's very clearly.
They even have like I was gonna mention in my little final wrap up, but it's that shot where he looks out his window and he sees the fence and then the spaceship comes down. It kind of has the same shape and feel of the E.T. spaceship a little bit.
Absolutely.
It's got that round.
He's very overtly like riffing on it in that way. And my only complaint, I think, is that just I watched it literally right after watching Life Force.
Yeah.
And the visual imagination in Life Force is just like a little bit more extreme because Hooper is not doing like a basic family melodrama blockbuster style film. when he's not doing the crazy monster shit. Because when he gets into the crazy monster shit, this gets very imaginative.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But I would just say when he's not doing it, it is a lot of like watching a sort of bad child actor like feel like he's being gaslit by like a teacher, and like that's kind of like what long stretches of it play like, and it is pretty cool to watch Hooper do like his own sort of like kitschy version of like a Close Encounters or an E.T. style film, and then push it into something that is like legitimately weird and gross, which makes those scenes like I think more shocking because you don't really expect them in that kind of film that we're watching here, and the effects are like incredibly impressive to look at. And I will say I'll give credit to him too. I think that the ending is really fucking scary.
Yeah.
Where he gets all the way home and they imply that it's like sort of like a dream and his parents are back. But then he goes into their bedroom and he hears like the weird like alien sounds again and stuff like that. And there is something here about like being a little bit like presenting, the sort of adulthood and childhood in like sort of warmer American domestic movies, and just making something a little bit grimmer and cynical about that, and also including as Chris put, like an incredibly dumbfounded military aspect that is just led by a child who's talking about meatballs and stuff. So like there's some really like well done tongue-in-cheek like genre play happening in this film that I have to appreciate, which means that I can't I just can't agree with everyone who's like this is like one of Hooper's worst movies.
No,
Yeah, by far it is not. It's I'm also gonna give it the high 3. It for me, it was just like I just wanted a little bit more of the kind of like bizarre parent scenes, like where they're trying to act as human beings, but they're aliens. I think that they could have actually milked that a little more. I was enjoying kind of the weirdo, bizarre aspects of that. But overall, I think this was really entertaining. I think it's a great kind of tongue-in-cheek sci-fi riff. I do clearly see that he's kind of, I don't know if you want to say he's like paying homage or actually poking fun at the whole, Spielberg and more classic family science fiction kind of stuff.
See, I would argue paying homage, but then you throw in the tiff between them that is implied in the history of the production of Poltergeist, and you get something a little bit that feels a little bit sharper, a little bit meaner, maybe.
Yeah, that's the vibe I get for sure. So I would give it a high 3, but I don't know. I really did enjoy this. I'm gonna rewatch it, I think, and maybe it could get the upgrade because I do find a lot of charm in this. So yeah,
this would like literally be the line between a high 3 and a low 4 to me. Like this is so exactly that line, because what I think I miss from it is something like when Lorraine Newman as Carlson's mother is like eating raw meat.
Right.
Like,
I want more of that.
Little strange note, like her eating, Louise Fletcher eating the frog. Like more of that, I think really would have brought this into where Hooper wanted it to be fully. But like, it's also incredible to watch. I mean, this is 1986. The rocket ship explodes. This is the same year as the Challenger disaster.
Oh wow!
Oh, no. And I'm like, oh my god! Like, I'm like, Jesus! Like to talk about, like to be able to be on the precipice of national fears that high, and I'm like, oh, like it just gives it a whole other meaning to me and a whole other like fear to me that it didn't have when I just watched it as a funny alien movie when I was a kid. And like, it's funny that transitions from like big, national issues to something more primal and familial and rural in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2. Like there's an interesting shift there between what Life Force and Invaders was trying to do to what TCM2 does. So I really love this movie.
Awesome. Well, I think that'll wrap it up for Invaders from Mars. We're going to be right back, and we're going to be talking about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2.
Years ago, audiences across America were horrified by the savagery of a faceless killer. In the wake of this bizarre rampage, he vanished. Now, after more than a decade of silence, he has come out of hiding. Chainsaw Massacre 2. The Buzz is back. Directed by Tobe Hooper.
All right, we are back, and we are talking the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, or also known as Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2, the 1986 American black comedy slasher film directed by Tobe Hooper, obviously a sequel to his legendary low-budget horror masterpiece, The Texas Chainsaw, which we just discussed on this show probably like 2 or 3 months ago. So if you guys haven't heard that episode and you want to hear us talk about the Texas Chainsaw Massacre and all of its sort of like expressionist psychological terror abstracted through like this very blunt, tangibles, almost snuff film quality. Yeah. We went absolutely wild and talked like a full hour on all of its sort of like late 60s, early 70s sort of like political landscape, cynicism, and violence that inspired it, and how he basically turned his film into a very grisly work of art. And he loves doing things about like strange, abusive family dynamics. He likes he very much likes this idea of an industry of meat is one thing, and how the characters sort of get treated that way. But he also has a very stripped down, bare, essential, tangible quality to that film that he just sort of overpowers with style and mood, creating this very like menacing, metaphysical quality with these like hot orange colors in the daylight, and then like the low light 16 millimeter film stock that he uses to get like the blues at night. And we talked endlessly about the last half hour of Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is just a woman screaming in a hell void for like 30 minutes straight, literally being attacked
super
by
close-ups and
nature. And I mean, even there's borderline experimental shots, like the extreme close-up on like the blood capillaries in her eyes, and how like deeply ingrained and primal her sort of like terror experience is. And so like, again, if you want to hear us go like a full hour deep into Texas Chainsaw, because we won't have time to get into it for this one, go back and listen to that one. We're going to bring it up probably sporadically as we talk about what is very different in Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, because he does keep a lot of elements. This still does have a very nasty quality to its violence, but it's obviously, with makeup artist Tom Savini working on this film, it's a little less blunt and implied than it is very on screen and very in your face, even if it's, you know, it feels just as vicious and ferocious as the first film. But we did talk a lot about how the first film doesn't have a lot of gore shots. It doesn't have a lot of nudity and stuff, because he didn't think that he was making like the hardest X rating he'd ever get film when he was making that film. He thought that could be like a PG-13 almost kind of film, because it just, you know, it didn't
don't show blood and stuff. It's fine.
Yeah, but he just accidentally made the most like
terrifying
movie of all time, and like a pure expression of like an unhinged state of mind. Like that film again ends on Leatherface doing a chainsaw ballet in what looks like an image from Terrence Malick's Badlands or something. So it's, you know, he just made one of the absolute like craziest horror films, and he came to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 with kind of like, I think he found it ludicrous, the idea that there would even be a sequel to that. He was just like, the whole point, and we talk about it a little bit when we talked about it, is that movie basically doesn't really start or end. It's basically the experience of watching that is that sort of like you exist, you discover this horrifying thing that exists in the same place as you, sort of reclaiming this idea of like, you know, there are monsters already in your home, already existing in America, already existing in systems that we live in. You realizing that it's there, being very fucking scared of it, and there's nothing you can do about it. It's just kind of like, now you have that knowledge.
Screaming.
Yeah. So even if you escape it, you still have to just live with I mean, what's the really famous tagline that one has? Who will be left alive and what will be left of them? It's like, what is really like left of you at that point once you've seen that abyss.
And we also see kind of the, we'll get to the specifics, but that trajectory takes hold in this movie as well.
It's very similar, yes, but he definitely leans into, because this came out, this is 12 years later after Texas Chainsaw, the first one, I think.
74?
Yeah, it was 74 and then 86. So 12 years later, this comes out, and Hooper obviously partially intended, even though it's still, again, one of the most gruesome portraits that there's ever been, he did intend Texas Chainsaw to be a little bit of a love letter to his home state in a lot of ways, and sort of an angle that other people maybe didn't see it in. And this one, he gets to take that actually probably a little bit further. He actually seems to have fun a little bit hanging out in some of the Texas locales. We actually get to see some of them. It's not just like you're on the highway and then you're in this abandoned house and you're and then there's the gas station. Like here we get to see the local radio station. We get to see the people driving around. We get to see a chili contest. We get to see things that Tobe Hooper very clearly seemed to love growing up in Texas. And so you get kind of like Texas Chainsaw Massacre funneled through a very Southern fried Reagan era 80s excess with some very blatant humor, some very insane Savini gore.
Very sexual, suggestive themes with Leatherface.
Yeah.
We should acknowledge that this film basically inspired the entire book. Was it Men, Women, and Chainsaws? Yep. Which was the book that kind of took a gendered theory analysis of the slasher film and how it was kind of that rare genre that always gave you kind of an input into the female experience. And Hooper definitely, we'll say, takes that to the next level by including some very horny Leatherface imagery. That is talked about, and it creates one of the best lines in this entire movie that I absolutely love, involving sex or the saw, man.
Yeah.
Saw's family.
Saw's family.
The thing I like,
Chainsaw heaven, baby.
The thing I like is the difference is that when you had this in the first one, it's all stripped out Texas. It's nothingness for miles, these little tiny things. You get the vastness of Texas in that first movie. And this is all interiors. This is very incredible interiors. They do an incredible production. The production design is incredible. But this is all contained areas for what is, ironically also a more blown out version of the family than the last one.
Yeah, I mean, he really loves these family dynamics, and I'm not sure if it is just coming from a Texas family. He loves to investigate that kind of stuff. He obviously takes it to an absurdist degree, but he also did it in something like The Funhouse, which we talked about not too long ago, which definitely had the sort of Carney hiding his monstrous son, and the weird dynamic, that kind of Phantom of the Opera dynamic almost that came out of that. And also Eaten Alive, which the normal family who shows up in that film, the quote-unquote normal family who comes to the motel, is basically just as unhinged and fucking wild as the scythe-murdering, alligator-worshipping madman in that film.
Yeah.
There's... And it helps, too, that I think it's William Finley plays the father in, who's supposed to be the normal psycho family thing that's happening there. And, again, he seems very... which also makes Invaders from Mars kind of stand out a little bit, because weirdly enough, that's probably the most wholesome family dynamic before they get taken in by the aliens.
Oh yeah,
he definitely
the parents are
has some
cartoonishly 50s, they're just oh hey son, how you doing today? Yeah,
and the most.
So he has.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, so he has some interesting hang-ups about the American family unit, and he really gets to take that to very insane heights when he gets into this family of cannibals who reside in Texas. And I really loved the opening where he talks about how the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre was Sally breaking out of a window in hell.
Yeah.
And that what's been happening over the last 10 years is that the lawman could not locate the macabre murder house, And so during the last 13 years, bizarre, grisly chainsaw murders keep happening. But the Texas Chainsaw Massacre on paper never technically happened, but it still haunts, and it seems to have no end, is what the opening text crawl basically says. And it seems to have no end. I'm not sure if that is, once again, Hooper being like, why does a Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequel exist?
Yeah. Was this, by the way, I don't know if you mentioned
I'm just going to go crazy.
Was this something that he wanted to make? Like, was this something where he was like, I need to make part 2? Or was this a canon going, we want you to make a sequel because it's just going to do really well?
I don't know that we know, because, again, I don't think he ever, like, he's like the opposite of a burning bridge guy. Like, he'll never talk about it.
Okay. Because it comes off as like, it definitely comes off like he's almost making fun of like his own creation, and then also making fun of the excess of the 80s and stuff. So I wasn't sure if he was on board and really enjoying it, or if he was kind of just having his fun while throwing a middle finger up to everybody.
The commentary on TCM2 does seem like he had this idea that this was something he wanted to do. But he also, like, he pitched it to them as like, oh no, it's going to be, just like the first one, grisly, he didn't tell them about like, this is going to be red comedy. This is going to be like really out there stuff. And that's why they hate the shit out of it.
Gotcha.
Well, yeah. And he originally pitched it too, though, that with an idea that they rejected, which was something to do, sort of about like more like almost like the factory production. It sounded like he had something more to do, kind of like Eaten Alive version of this, where it like takes place almost entirely with them, like in the house kind of deal, was what it seemed like he kind of pitched, which Canon didn't like, and they wanted more like make it again like there's
teenagers
people getting killed off, and like so then he had to sort of restructure it a little bit that way.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
The interesting thing about that is that, like, one of the things that I really take away from the first one is the line in when the hitchhiker comes into the car and he's like, the old way was better. Industrialization is a hobby horse of Hooper's, and he really does it becomes bigger in The Mangler, which is all about that. But like that would be a lot more interesting to see how they turned their business into a factory. Like where it used to be a mom and pop shop of human hot dogs or whatever, to see like an actual process like that would be really amazing. Actually,
there's a lot of talk in this one about how the small businessman is always screwed over. But I do like that he immediately announces to you that this is going to be a very different that opening scene of like the yuppie Texas bros like firing guns and joyriding in their Jeep and calling in to the rock station and just having a great time.
And they're so animated too. Like their performances are over the fucking top. They're pretty much equal to what we see later with the family, except they're just like preps instead. And it really does. It just sets the tone perfectly. Like it's one of those things, I guess what we were talking about with like Invaders from Mars, where it seems people really like this one, but I could see someone thinking like, oh, this is just dumb and
people
wild.
People didn't like it at the time.
Oh, well, there you go. That always happens on this fucking show. People do not respect the good stuff, man.
And I do sort of understand, because I think people went in being like, we're going to get another Texas Chainsaw, and clearly Hooper didn't want to just do the same thing again. He had something else that he wanted to explore. And you can tell by just like the saturation of some of the colors and some of the craziness of some of the imagery, like the Halloween costume turning on a chainsaw side by side in the car while they're driving along. Like there's nothing like that even slightly resembles the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Like it's missing that sort of like elementally primal
fear,
terror quality. And this is something just way more vividly absurd, but still like incredibly repulsive. So it's kind of like a grotesque, like cartoon satire of the original film in certain ways. But Hooper, just an incredibly skilled filmmaker. So none of this ends up meaning that it's like cheap or lazy or it's a rehash. Like it feels like she's exploring a different part of himself, and part of that is he wanted to because I think he was a little pissed off that he got the X rating without doing gore. I think he was like, then let's just fucking do the gore then.
Yeah, like what's the point? Yeah, I might as well show everything if you're gonna give it to me anyway.
He very loudly has said, like, I went up to Tom Savini and I said, go for it. Just go all out. And I'm like, you're asking Tom Savini to do that? Like,
Yeah,
I'm
he
surprised there
does,
wasn't just like a tidal wave of blood and guts at some point.
Yeah, well, at one point,
well,
like Dennis Hopper, I think he's busting open that wall and blood just flies out of it. Like it's chunky too. Like it's not just like straight up paint or whatever. It's got chunks and guts in it, and it's just, oh my god. Or like the peeling of the skin from LG.
Ooh.
It is nightmare fuel, but it's so excessive and so in your face that you almost, like, at a certain point you gotta laugh because it's like it's so over the top and ridiculous.
It's really rendering, like when he knocks down that wall, that's like rendering plant stuff that's coming out. Like it's not just like cheap like blood and stuff. It's like, no, this is actual guts and all the there's an amazing part of the commentary. It's actually the best part where he actually talks a lot about production. He's like, yeah, I bought, these are all skeletons. They're actual skeletons because they're actually, it's cheaper to buy actual skeletons in bulk than plastic ones. It turns out.
On a budget, baby.
From India. Like he goes through this whole thing where he's like, yeah, it's actually, he's like, I had an idea for a film called Skeleton Farm from this, where he was going to like, people would be like, taking well care of, like dental and everything, but only to be turned into skeletons that you could sell to producers and movie makers.
Oh my god!
And I was like, man.
So it's like, do you know if, for instance, when they show Franklin's skeleton and he's sitting and they put him in the wheelchair still, is that a real skeleton?
I believe so.
No?
I think all the skeletons in the underground lair are real skeletons.
That's crazy. That's absolutely
the underground layer, should be noted, is one of the greatest feats of production design of the 80s. Has to be.
Oh, it's so good.
It is unbelievable, and a huge part of kind of like where he's pulling his aesthetic from a little bit too, because it literally is an abandoned carnival ground decorated with human bones and giant multicolored lights and sort of like remnants of the carnival and fairs and rides and
I also love
things
the
like that.
the outside of it with this, like, it's like a concrete I don't know, it's like it almost seems like abstract art, the way that it's all slapped together. Like it's got graffiti all over the place. It has these like cement slides. It's the strangest looking thing I've ever seen on film almost.
Yeah, I really do appreciate that, like, there is kind of an element to this where there is this decayed carnival that he has chosen basically as his overall aesthetic. Like that's what it feels like you're watching. There is like there are these like repulsive set pieces, just like the last 40 minutes of this movie is just one long set piece of wandering around this decrepit, decaying place of like sensory and entertainment, which does feel a little bit like Hooper starting to get a little bit disillusioned by the movie industry and what the fact that he is marketing a sequel to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He's like, it just seems ridiculous when you say it like that. And it's helped too by the poster, which is very clearly a riff on the Breakfast Club. Like it's literally the exact same poster as the Breakfast Club, but with the Texas Chainsaw characters.
Yeah.
And because of that, I do sort of understand that, it does make sense that Cannon hated his movie, that he was turning in something that was sort of like a double-edged thing of like, here's what a sequel to Texas Chainsaw Massacre kind of looks like. But the thing is it's so vividly rendered and it's so skillfully made that there was no choice. This had to get reclaimed at a certain point, because like the actual set pieces themselves are insane. Like when you look at that mural inside the carnival underground, this like subterranean like theme park candy colored layer, and then all of a sudden Dennis Hopper holding 3 chainsaws rips it open, and blood and guts and intestines literally leak out of this colorful mural, and Dennis Hopper says, "It's the devil's playground."
I'm taking it all down.
And he's here to get bloody revenge for killing Franklin and for I think they mentioned that Sally was like institutionalized or something like that, basically driving Sally insane.
I love Hopper's line too, where he's just like looks at him and he just goes, "I am the Lord of the Harvest."
What's that?
Like, what the hell?
What's that? Some new healthcare food bunch?
Yeah. So it should be stated that this is fucking insane. And Dennis Hopper, by the way,
amazing.
Apparently he hated this movie. He thinks it's the worst movie that he was in.
He's so good. He somehow matches their like carnival craziness of their characters, and it's amazing because he's like everyone else looks like they're insane. Whereas Dennis Hopper is just straight up in like this Texas sheriff uniform with 2 chainsaws, and it's
a cowboy hat.
But somehow every time he opens his mouth, he's just as bizarre as everybody else. It's fantastic.
Yeah, he gives quite a performance, and I love the scene where he's shopping for the chainsaws.
Oh, it's so
and
good.
because you have to wonder at a certain point when he goes shopping for the chainsaws and he grabs one giant one. Then he's like, okay, but that I don't just need that. I need also these 2 small ones.
I need dual wield them, yeah.
Yeah, and then he starts practicing on the tree in a way that is very clearly he's not practicing cutting a tree down.
Yeah.
And you have to wonder, and the guy's sitting, the guy who owns the chainsaw shop is watching him, and he was like, you have to feel like he'd be like, what are you going to use these for?
Yeah, what is this, man?
Yeah, what's
that is not proper technique.
What's going on here?
I feel like it's kind of like the Taxi Driver scene when he's buying the guns.
Exactly.
Like, and the guy just says like the weird like hot dog, that's a hot ham or something to him. I'm like, geez, how would you say that?
Yeah. No, 100%. That is exactly what that scene plays like. It plays like Toby Hooper doing the Taxi Driver scene, but he's shopping for chainsaws to chop people up. And also, again, the dual wield aspect is insane. And it's also worth noting this came out the same year as Blue Velvet, where Dennis Hopper is like sucking on oxygen and like brutally murdering and like assaulting people in the David Lynch dreamscape as well. So Dennis Hopper had one hell of a year.
Yeah. And speaking on chainsaws as well, I like the fact that it's used obviously as a violent weapon, such as like where Dennis Hopper uses it or every time Leatherface uses it on a victim. But then they also have all the suggestive themes where Leatherface basically sees it as his penis. And and that is just obviously sickening and bizarre, but because it's so aggressive and because of all these like close-ups of his disgusting teeth and him kind of smiling and trying to like flirt with her and stuff, it just gives off this like comedic aspect too, even though it's obviously horrible, but it's so strange and yeah.
Well, and we talked about it on the first one too. When we were talking about that, we talked about how something that's so scary about Leatherface is that he is like very clearly sort of like intellectually and emotionally like stunted,
right?
But he has like this giant meaty body that's so powerful, and like that's something that is really kind of scary about him, because when you get into the family dynamics, you know, after they've captured Sally and he's like putting on the face makeup to go to dinner, like there's something sort of innocent about him, but at the same time we know what he's capable of. We saw the scene, the incredible shot where he, you know, pulls the dude and slams the door and puts the girl on the meat hook and things like that. So you have to reconcile that with like a character who is very clearly an abused, you know, sort of stunted man. So when you watch this and they introduce like him, it seems like going through puberty.
Yeah, this is
at this point in his
teenage
life.
Years for sure.
Yeah, this is teenage.
He's dancing, you know, he's humping the air with the chainsaw. He's just a horny guy, man. He's just trying to express himself.
Flickering tongue everywhere.
Yeah. Oh God.
And there is something weirdly kind of cathartic about seeing the gore and seeing the effect of what he does with the saw in this one too. Like when he chops that one dude's head off in the car and it like slides right off, and then you know you do get a semblance of like I guess the penetrative aspect of the chainsaw like is more visualized in this, so you get kind of like a feel for that.
I mean, they do have that shot of him literally like kind of sneakily going up her leg right to her area,
very
and
disturbing,
just kind of,
very disturbing.
Yeah, very disturbing.
Like her And also he chainsaws the ice bed of soda cans so that she is like soaking wet.
Yeah.
So her leg, Bear's skin is like soaking wet, and he's like rubbing it with like the chain.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's also
so bizarre.
It's ingenious to put that, to have like your product placement be the bed for this incredibly weird scene. Like Mountain Dew, Pepsi signs, like all that, and that's literally what she's on while this like metaphorical rape is going on.
Yeah,
like
drink
it's
Pepsi.
Incredible.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah,
I also like. I do like
that whole scene in the radio station, especially with Bill Moseley, who has replaced I think it was Ed. Who were we talking about?
The hitchhiker.
I can't remember.
Yeah,
yeah. Who has sort of like. I don't know if they couldn't get him again, but I think he was Edwin Neal was in the first one. Right. So in this one they've replaced him with Bill Moseley, who does a pretty good job of like re-rendering that performance.
Oh
like,
yeah,
the voice and stuff is right, and like a lot of his actions and stuff are right. And again, but they just have to up the grotesquerie of it. So when they get into that radio station looking for the tape that the radio host DJ recorded of those kids being murdered, because once again Leatherface and I think his name is in this one it's Chop Top. They call him Chop Top Sawyer. Yeah. They just love like wilding out and killing people on the streets, which is obviously what results in them getting caught. So they go to the radio station to get the tape back because it's clearly a tape of them murdering the fucking like yuppie kids in the Jeep, and that metal plate on his head, and he's scratching it with the coat hanger,
and the burning, when he uses the lighter. It's just these like little added details that makes everything slightly grosser than it already is. And then when he reveals the plate, it's got like crusty skin around it and shit. It's like yellow. It's so nasty.
It's amazing. If you again, like I'm going to be referencing the commentary all the time, but like the way he explains that is that he keeps the skin from fusing over the plate because if he can get the coat hanger underneath the plate, he ejaculates immediatally. And like this is how he gets off, is constantly being able to keep open that wound. And like,
oh my god!
I'm like, of course you couldn't have gone into that much detail into the movie. Like, actually, be like, yeah, I get off from this, but like that, and also
you do get a really sick, twisted feeling out of watching
he's
it.
Enjoying
it
for sure.
Yeah.
I just never like, and you kind of, now that I'm looking back, like I can totally see it. But it is interesting because like every time he does it, he's definitely deriving pleasure from it. That is for sure.
Oh god.
So,
yeah, and then when he heats it up with the lighter, and even also just some of the lines that he's getting in the scene where he's trying to introduce himself as someone who's like gonna like request some songs.
Big fan.
But again, everything about his performance is just like off, and also there's the exposed teeth. And there's like this magenta lighting. Again, it's very colorful. And I love too the line that he gets when he's asking about the tape that they played on the radio, which was played so that everyone else would believe that there is a chainsaw killer out, so that someone will believe Dennis Hopper, so he can go on his revenge mission.
Yeah.
But he says, "What was that tape that you were playing? The Rambo 3 soundtrack?"
Oh yeah.
which again, talking about sort of like 80s excess and movie making in that way, especially. So like you definitely feel like Hooper is like there is a pointed nature to this satire, both about a Texas Chainsaw movie, but also he can't help but just like make it. I mean, I would say this isn't really as scary, I guess, I would say, as Texas Chainsaw, because Texas Chainsaw is, I think, just still a movie that scares the shit out of me when I watch it, like almost every time that I watch it. So, and this is sacrificing that, but again, doing so intentionally, to sort of like make some points. So. I find it interesting that this was like as rejected kind of as it was, because it is so skillfully made, and I can't help but watch it now and just be like, dude, these set pieces are still like incredible. Like everything about that radio DJ scene and how it does that cross-cutting. I'm surprised this guy wasn't a horror editor when I ended up watching this, because that scene where he is, very suggestively shooting the chainsaw like it's Leatherface's penis, but cross-cutting with Chop Top hammering her friend in the head.
Oh, over and over again, yeah.
And over and over, and blood squirting everywhere. So then at a certain point, you have this extreme close-up of the saw touching wet skin, and then it cuts to an extreme close-up of like blood squirting out of this dude's head,
and he's seizures and
smashed
stuff
with a hammer.
Like it's just and that guy takes so much pain in this movie. Like that's not even his death, right? Like he gets hammered in the head like 4 or 5 times, and then he gets moved to the slaughterhouse, and he gets skinned.
They use an electric turkey cutter on him to flay him.
They put it on her, which is fucking insane. And then they have a conversation while she's in the face mask, and he's alive. And it's just, he goes through the most like torturous, bizarre death ever. It's really
that sequence
excessive.
Is so disturbing because it is and again, it's like the wet peeling sounds are so fucking disgusting as they're like peeling the pieces of his fucking skin off, and Leatherface again innocently using them like I've got a new toy or something like that, like the way he's like
trying it on.
But then when he's holding up her friend's face as a mask and she says it's wet, he puts it on her, and it's so fucking gross. But again, for Leatherface, this is like a genuinely sweet interaction of like him sharing his new toy because he likes her and it's a gift. And then he gets up and he starts dancing with her. But her friend is like technically still alive in the corner. He wakes up without a face on. He looks at her, who is wearing his face. And like the absurdly disgusting concept of this scene is just so fucking repulsive and disgusting that you can't help but like laugh, but it is a very poisonous, like black sense of humor. Like it is so fucking gross.
I mean, Hooper didn't want to, I feel like his whole idea was like, just make sure the characters make sense, and that's how you make it more disturbing. Like, Leatherface only has one moment of like quote unquote introspection in the first one, and that's when he's alone in the house. Like, and he's just kind of like squealing, and then like sits on the couch. It's like, rough day. But like now, he is a major part of this. He is a character. He's a full-fledged character in this movie, which is just the attempt to do that
and like
is just insane to do. But he pulls it off because he cares about this.
Yeah, there's definitely something in Hooper that like he is able to somehow, and even a little bit in the first one, like he does have talk about, sort of like how they are sort of like outmoded workers who ever retransferred their skills into horror. But like there is something, there's always a sense of like he feels for the people on screen, even when he's inventing the most horrible things that could possibly happen to them, and just intentionally trying to repulse you. Like when the dad comes up and he's like, "You have one choice, boy, the sex or the saw." And I love the follow-up line that he has where he's like, "Sex is, well, nobody knows," and it's very telling that the father says nobody really knows. He has 2 kids. But the saw is family, and we get even more crazy implied history and family dynamics, which is something we said too about the first one that was really strong, and something he continues here, was that there are enough like very small horrifying details in this that you get an implied larger history of the family, like how they introduce Grandpa, the way that Grandpa is introduced in that first film, where they just go up and they think that they're keeping corpses in the attic, and then Grandpa is like fucking alive, and they're saying Grandpa was one of the best killers, and they're having him do the dinner scene with the trying to like hammer her, and it's so terrible.
Now he's become like a vampire, basically, like sucking the blood out of people to stay alive.
Yeah, being kept alive just barely by fluids. But also there's something so terrifying about that, about getting Grandpa to use the hammer, even though he's so weak, because there's no way he'll get like a clean kill.
Yeah, and they
replicate that scene. In this one, they have the full dinner scene again, except the production design of like their lair is so much fucking crazier, with like the cobwebs and body parts and real skeletons apparently, and like again the crazy colored lighting that they have underground.
What I really like about that is that he's constantly reminding you of the like creativity of Outsiders, like not just this whole underground thing, which is incredible and is like just
but they're industry.
of upping what like the bone furniture from the first one, but like also like LG making the little fry house in his spare time, like little notes like that suggest like these people have interior lives and have like thoughts of creation that doesn't make them just plain.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and it's just. And honestly, which kind of fits the film because the film is very like just creatively designed like monstrosity in its own way.
Yeah, exactly.
So that you get these characters who they are creating their own. I mean, as we said in the first one, I think they called the corpses they find in the opening scene of the first Texas Chainsaw a grisly work of art. Yep. You get something similar sort of happening here, but the characters sort of also expressing that. Which brings us to like the really big finale, because after they do the dinner scene and after they do a repeat of the dinner scene, which is just even more disgusting. But luckily, we got Dennis Hopper in this one. And Dennis Hopper has been slowly breaking in to the lair that they have taken the radio DJ and her friend to get revenge on them for killing Franklin. And he does find Franklin's corpse at one point, and he basically decides he's just going to take the whole fucking place down. He starts like chainsawing all their little works of art and their little constructions and designs that they do to like keep this place sort of like built, like actually standing up, because it is very like precariously like a subterranean cave kind of, but with just like these wooden structures. But when Dennis Hopper breaks in, and he does the "I'm the Lord of the Harvest," and we get a full out fucking chainsaw battle.
Oh yeah,
between Leatherface and Dennis Hopper.
Love it.
In one of the most cartoonishly, violently designed like action scenes I've probably ever seen, because they are stabbing each other. At one point, Leatherface gets entirely gutted by the giant chainsaw, and it gets so stuck in there, Dennis Hopper has to leave it in there. Yeah, and pull out the two chainsaws. But this scene ends up ending with is it Grandpa tries to pick up the hammer and throw it at Dennis Hopper, but instead he misses Dennis Hopper and hits Leatherface, who has been gutted, has a giant chainsaw sticking out of his gut, and Savini's makeup of the chainsaw going through him is insane.
So good. And
so he hits Leatherface in the head. He falls. Grandpa falls. And Leatherface drops his chainsaw, which goes through the table and hits the father, Drayton, who's hiding beneath the table holding a grenade, who then drops the grenade, and Dennis Hopper is on top of the table screaming like, "I've done it!" Like there's like this cathartic moment of like he killed Leatherface.
Yeah.
And then the grenade fucking goes off and all of them just explode to death, presumably.
Yeah, that was one thing I found a little bizarre, just that, and I don't know if it was maybe just budget purposes, whatever, but that they didn't show like the excessive explosion. I don't think it's necessary, but I was just curious because the rest of the movie is so excessive. So I was like, there's going to be like a giant layer explosion, but instead what they do is they just kind of have like the sound go off as the
and dust come through the tunnel a little bit,
right, as he's chasing the lead girl. And I didn't mind it. I mean, I really enjoyed it regardless, but I was surprised that there wasn't like a big explosion.
Well, we do know that there was stuff cut from this film. Because, and honestly, from what I understand, it was mostly for length.
Yeah.
Apparently, they just didn't like that it was over. Like an hour 40 is actually pretty long for a slasher film, just in general.
Yeah.
And apparently this was like nearly 2 hours or something like that. So there's an entire sequence cut where apparently they are like going around hunting for meat for their chili, for the best chili in all of Texas, where they don't skimp out on the meat. Like I saw like there's a brief like really shitty deleted footage that you can find of it, and like it is like entire heads and bodies coming apart. Like Savini went all out for the scene that they cut out of the film.
Was that the Joe Bob Briggs scene?
Yes, that's the one they cut out.
That's a weird scene if you see it on. Like it's very, even for this movie, it's a little, it's almost like too comic, because it's just Bob Briggs like making commentary over this destruction.
Yeah, there is definitely points where it gets into the realm of slapstick, but like again, like that, the way that final confrontation goes between all of the Cannibal family and Dennis Hopper. But like, again, you can feel that, like, as much as it goes slapstick, like, Hooper takes elements of it seriously enough and amps the horror up so much that you do get this, like, weird whiplash effect, because there is nothing but, like, fear that comes out of that final set piece. Because after that giant slapstick scene, and she runs up the mountaintop and finds Grandma in chainsaw heaven.
That throw
is amazing.
Yeah, and Grandma is still alive as she rips the chainsaw out, and she's being slashed by Chop Top while she's, like, trying to, like, start the chainsaw up. And again, the design of Chainsaw Heaven and how high up it is. And then she, like, hits him with the chainsaw, and Chop Top falls all the way into the giant tube that goes all the way down the mountain. And it has the exact same ending as the first film, with someone wielding a chainsaw above their head and dancing and freaking out and going completely unhinged mania.
She's become the primal monster.
Yep.
Yeah, but it actually is the final girl in this case, which is, like, you know, kind of an interesting little subversion on what he was doing with the first film, and kind of like how this has kind of infected all of us now, that the general excess of the problems from the 60s and 70s still existing in the 80s, but everything is just, like, more cartoonish and wild and, like, overtly on display as, like, more horrifying.
Yeah, I love that it doesn't really give you, like, the traditional wrap up either. I guess the first one doesn't as well, but there's still, like, a sense of escape with Sally in the first one, whereas this one, her wielding the chainsaw and just going insane, watching, you know, the what's his name again? I always called him Platehead because I couldn't remember.
Chop Top.
Chop Top. You know, sliding into the tunnel that we saw just explode. It gives this very, like, it's not like, it's not an ending. It feels like it just kind of cuts away, and you're left with just this high energy, bizarre movie that you just watched. And I love that about it. I think it's a good ending for this film, because it's not, you know, there's not a clean wrap up in any way, shape, or form, and that's perfect for this.
Yeah, well, once again, the same way he always intended the first one, as he describes in the opening crawl, it seems to have no end.
Right.
It's just like there is no sort of, like, escape from this in any capacity, and in fact, it seems to just be growing. It's infecting more of us.
Yeah. Right.
Even the quote unquote good people are now that way. Like that's both Dennis Hopper and what's her name? Shit, this is good.
DJ Stretch.
That's right. Yeah. She is amazing in this movie.
Yeah.
I like her a lot on this, and it is interesting too that you bring up that, like, you know, she is very normal at the beginning of the film, and Dennis Hopper is very weird even at the beginning of the film, but it's definitely like he is meant to be a stand-in for, like, the Southern, you know, stoic lawman character, and, like, so we already know the kind of character that he's supposed to be, and the fact that he's so different from it is exactly the point.
Have you guys seen the third one? Because apparently Carolyn Williams, the girl that plays the lead, is in it, and I was just curious if, like, her character transfers over in a meaningful way or something like that.
I haven't seen it.
Okay.
Literally the only Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie I have not seen.
Oh, okay.
I've seen almost all of them at this point, and
I see that she's unfortunately seems to have taken a little bit of a step back. She was in Veronica, Josh.
Oh no!
Yeah, so that
Really?
sucks because she's really talented, it seems, and apparently
I don't even remember her.
No, that's
in
the thing. I
Veronica.
just looked it up, man, and she was just like she was one of the peasant girls in the virgin blood sequence or whatever.
That's got to be really depressing.
That's got to suck,
like,
and she's good.
making Texas Chainsaw 2, and then
Yeah, and she's really good too. So that's a bit of a bummer, but. I'm gonna have to watch the third one though, because if she's in it, maybe her character actually like goes over and does something.
It does appear she gets a very lowly build on that one.
Oh yeah, it does.
Unfortunately,
uncredited. Yeah, maybe not.
So pivoting towards productive rating round on Texas Chainsaw, this one gets the high 4 for me, honestly. This one is every time I watch it, it gets a little bit closer to inching towards the 5.
Yeah, me too.
I do think that I do miss the like the elemental primal quality of Texas Chainsaw a little bit, but I also understand that he's doing something completely different with this one, and he is taking a lot of the same elements and translating them into an overtly absurd, practically farcical degree of repulsiveness and monstrousness. So the American madness of Texas Chainsaw almost becomes like a little bit of like a Looney Tunes type thing with unparalleled production design and makeup and color. And clearly the tone of this film had to be huge inspiration on Joe Dante, who would go on to make films that are sort of in this line, just with less gore. But something like Gremlins 2 is like what I think about when I watch something like this, even though Hooper, once again, leaning into, the horror of like the body horror elements, for sure. The thing that, like, when I first watched this, the way that I tried to describe it was that it's a movie that is like so absurdly revolting that it circles back into being funny. That it's like you're having a kind of a good time. You almost have a whiplash because you're having fun at something that's so absurdly gross. Yeah. But then it is followed by like a sick sort of sadness by the time you hit the end of the film, as you realize that what you're laughing at is just like very intense pain, and it's so vividly rendered by Tom Savini in the gore effects and stuff like that. Like that, you do sort of feel something kind of darker and sadder about like just what you're actually seeing, even if the tone doesn't quite match that. And apparently, though, Hooper and his editor, who he pulled over from Invaders from Mars, they said that their experience like editing this film was just laughing their asses off. They like every time they had a reaction where they just like had their heads fully back and laughed at a scene, like the whole radio DJ scene. Apparently, that's how they knew that they had the movie that they wanted kind of on their hands. And one detail too I wanted to bring up that we didn't get to is that actually the makeup effect for Grandpa that Tom Savini did in this one is actually his, according to him, it's his most proud accomplishment as a makeup artist, because even though it's not like the most impressively gory thing that's in the film, like there are obviously way like the flaying scene or the head falling off, which, by the way, Tom Savini's hands are the hands in the driver's seat while the head is coming off, because he was puppeteering the design there. But the reason he loves the Grandpa thing so much is because basically they had to sort of mimic the effect from the first one, which is like a little bit cruder and obviously a little bit more low budget. Yeah. But Hooper and everyone was so impressed with it and how much that the texture of it reminded them of like the real skeletons that they had laying around, that like that's why it got so many like intense close-ups, like where you can see the pores and the details on its face.
There's one where he goes right into his eyes and they're just disgusting looking. It's great.
Yeah, so apparently Hooper was so impressed, that's why it got those shots, because he was basically like, I feel like I could do a close-up of this like it's just a normal human face, and it doesn't show that it's an effect. Yeah. Which is pretty true. It looks like very, very incredible. And the whole fucking design of just that layer and the colors and everything, unbelievable.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I give it the high 4 as well. I'm the same with you, man. I get closer and closer to it every time I watch it. I am what, like you, missing a little bit of that, like just very primal horror that comes from the first one. I love that, but I mean, I this going into the 80s, 1986. It's in the middle of like that excessive 80s horror stuff. Yeah, so it's so fitting, and I love that Tobe Hooper is he's so good at doing tongue-in-cheek stuff, but still keeping his very aggressive horror element in his films. It's very impressive the way that he can balance these kind of tones. Everything's just great. The makeup effects are amazing. I mean, Savini, of course, a king. And I love the ending, how just abruptly it ends on this just very high energy dance that she's doing, like it's been transferred over. I love Leatherface's dance in this. Like, instead of his like chaotic, improvised, sporadic, swinging of the chainsaw, instead he like holds it above his head and does a little shimmy. Like it's like this little. It's every time he does it, I crack up so hard, and I just love it. I'm gonna have to watch the third one and see where this goes, because I still haven't watched that one. So 4 out of 5 for now.
Yeah, I'd be in the same place. A really high 4, bordering on a 5. That is inevitable, I feel, but haven't gotten there quite yet. Like something I think gets buried in this is like Bill Moseley is so good in this movie. And they had to, the original idea was that he would be he would just have been the hitchhiker and continue on, but he's like a twin or something. It's funny. Hooper goes through this whole thing where he's like, Dennis Hopper is related to Franklin and Sally, but like he doesn't know how. And
I just always assumed he was like an uncle or something.
Well, that's what he's like. I don't really know, but yeah, he's related. Like, I'm like, you're thinking about the inner life of fucking Leatherface, and you haven't figured that one out. Okay, So like, but Bill Moseley, that whole scene, it is really representative of a very particular uncomfortable feeling of being with somebody who is talking about slightly normal stuff, but is clearly like got something else going on.
Deranged, yeah.
Yeah, and like, can you play Inavada Gadita or whatever he says to you?
Yeah.
But yeah, I really love this movie, and it is to me like I don't really care that much that it doesn't carry over the primalness of the original one, or I mean it does, but in a very different way. Because like the Funhouse is the movie where I feel like he's most trying to recapture the tone of what he was doing in the first Texas Chainsaw, whereas Eaten Alive seems more of the precursor to these movies. And it
well, I mean, Eaten Alive is I think like a perfect mix of what he's trying to do between them, because Eaten Alive does have like those surreal like comedy qualities a little bit, but honestly, Eaten Alive, like the filmmaking of it is still like that last half hour of Texas Chainsaw, where it's just like very confusing and strange, but in a way that like you can't really track almost in characters or plot. Like it doesn't make any sense almost, which is very cool, surreal experience. But Texas Chainsaw 2, he actually does draw like real characters who have like a very cartoonish psychology, but they do have a psychology to them,
right?
In ways that like Eaten Alive is just kind of all over the place. It's more like that scene where she's running in the forest away from Leatherface in Texas Chainsaw, but for like 90 minutes.
I love this movie.
Yeah, no, this is like I honestly can't believe that this exists.
I know.
Every time I watch it, I'm just like, even if it's not as like elemental and blunt as the original, still disturbing in how fanatical and repulsive the textures are and some of the style experimentation that he's doing. Yeah,
which out of the
unbelievable that I mean I understand why Cannon hated it when he turned it in, but my God,
which out of the 3 were the most expensive to make?
I think Life Force.
Oh, okay.
I think
actually it's it might be. Invaders from Mars though was 7 or 8, so it had to be pretty close.
Okay, so this one
Life
though
Force
was the least expensive out of the 3, probably.
Yeah, I think this one was $4 million.
It was
okay. Maybe they were starting to like not give him as much money.
Well, they gave him $6 million off the bat, and then they literally, when he started shooting, they said actually it's 4.7.
Oh, okay, I gotcha.
Yeah, which is the trouble he was having during the production, is he was like he planned on budgeting with more money than they were actually.
Right.
But this is also, by the time he was shooting Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, this was like they were probably less than a year out from bankruptcy.
Okay, gotcha.
So they were probably trying to cut.
Yeah, couldn't really give him the 8 mil this time.
But anyway, I think that will wrap it up for this week's episode. An insane run of 3 high-budget films, or at least mid-budget films from Tobe Hooper that he would never get the chance to do again.
What was the next one he did after this?
I think Spontaneous Combustion is after this.
Okay.
The Mangler is the one that is most like this.
Gotcha.
And I really highly suggest you watch that one. There's good, amazing Ted Levine in that.
Yeah, I'm going to watch those for sure.
Yeah, I honestly think I'm just going to go through everything that I can find.
Me too. I love him. He's great.
Available. I also want to watch. It looks like he did what looks like some sort of TV thriller that also might be an erotic thriller.
I'm Dangerous Tonight. That's Anthony Perkins and oh God, what's it from Twin Peaks?
And
Yep.
yeah, Machin
Yes.
Amik from Twin Peaks, and I saw Anthony Perkins and Twin Peaks, and I was like, okay, I might need to check.
It's pretty nuts.
What are his later stuff like? Like I see Jin and stuff like that. Is there a...
It's a little too much pure VOD stuff. Like there's flashes of what he's capable of, but you can tell that it wasn't there anymore. He had kind of sacrificed himself to the idea that this was going to be a job from now on.
I gotcha.
There's if you really want to go through it, there are things there, but like the Mangler is kind of where it ends, in my opinion.
Cool. I gotcha.
It seems like Mortuary actually has been reclaimed.
Yeah.
A little bit.
That one I'm not even sure if I've seen that. Like I've seen Crocodile, and there was.
Well, I was just looking at it, and like its average ratings are like higher than Life Force and
Really?
the Funhouse and Eaten
Jesus.
Alive. That's sort of interesting.
Mortuary also though seems to have like really mixed. Like there's huge bars on 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So yeah, holy shit. I love that though. Those are interesting films usually.
Some late period Vulgaro-Churist Toby Hooper reclaiming going on. We'll check it out. But I also want to see his John Carpenter co-directed Body Bags.
It's an interesting little movie
that has Carradine and Carpenter starring in it.
Oh, cool.
So
cool.
Either way, Toby Hooper, what a guy! Crazy films. I think we've officially talked about 6 Toby Hooper films in the last 3 months on this show. So we might take a little bit of a break from Toby Hooper, but it has been an absolute ride for sure. So thanks, Chris, so much for bringing these on with you. If you've got anything to plug, this is where we usually have that.
So I do a show, We Hate Movies. We're on iTunes. We have a Patreon, patreon.com/We Hate Movies. We put up a new episode every week for free on iTunes, and then we have a bunch of stuff in the behind our Patreon wall. We haven't actually done any Hooper, I don't think, which is insane to me, but we should definitely be doing that soon.
Well, you guys might be able to see me over on the We Hate Movies feed soon.
We I want to keep it a secret because it's a big title that we've been wanting to do for a while, and I know that you were very game for it. But it's going to be a big one, and I think it's going to be a lot of laughs.
Hell yeah, I'm very excited to talk about the movie we're talking about. So keep your eyes out for that in a couple of weeks here. Nice. Well, for our listeners, we are going to be back in 1 week's time with a bonus episode for you guys over on Patreon, where we are going to be doing keeping in the realm of canon, because we did 3 canon movies in a row. I was like, I want to do some more canon while we're hanging out here, and we've been wanting to do Albert Pyun for a while, and we haven't really figured out which ones we were going to do yet. So I just figured we would do the 2 most popular ones that there are, and he made them pretty close together. Technically, only one of them is actually canon, but one was being developed under canon before canon went bankrupt.
That counts.
So we're gonna do Cyborg from 1989, starring Jean-Claude Van Damme, which, as I already mentioned, was a sort of a last-minute stitching together of production design and costume elements from failed canon productions that which basically led directly to their they were already bankrupt at the time, and basically meant that they couldn't pay back any of their debts or anything. So Cyborg came out of that situation, and to be fair, Cyborg was a massive hit. So they did luck out a little bit with Cyborg because it cost very little to make and it was massive. And then we're going to be pairing it with Nemesis, which is sort of Albert Pyun doing a very low budget cyberpunk kind of Escape from New York, Blade Runner, Matrix, John Woo kind of craziness all together, but made very cheaply with very questionable performances, but a lot of fun. And so we're going to be talking about 2 very low budget Albert Pyun genre movies. That one sort of dystopia, apocalyptic with basically Jean-Claude Van Damme saving the planet by kicking things, as he likes to do.
Is tradition. Absolutely.
And Nemesis, which is probably the closest I've seen to something directly inspiring The Matrix.
Yeah.
That just lots of gun ballets and sunglasses. So and suits and stuff. So very excited to talk about both of those. That'll be next week's episode over on Patreon. And the week after, we're going to be back with a special guest, and we are doing a fucking massive episode. we are going to be doing Scarface and Carlito's Way.
Holy shit!
It's been a long time. I always intended to wait until we played Carlito's Way on the big screen at our theater before we
But
did
now
it.
who
I wanted
knows?
to watch it that way because I'm greedy. But who knows? And a guest really wanted to bring them both on because he is the #1 Al Pacino fan. And I've always wanted to make my case that Carlito's Way is the better movie. So prepare yourselves for that one.
Correct opinion.
Beautiful.
Nice. Chris is agreeing.
I haven't seen
got
it yet,
this.
so I might be in that same boat. We'll see. That's one.
The
that
difference
I've
is
missed.
Carlito's Way like destroys my soul. Like it moves me. Whereas Scarface, I just have a really great time with.
Yeah.
So anyway, we're gonna have a good time doing that in 2 weeks' time. But that being said, that'll wrap it up for everything this week. Thanks as always for listening, and keep it sleazy.
Keep it sleazy.